You're about to see one of the most valuable primitive tools used by Native Americans, and one very specific bone that seems to be made for this exact purpose. We're going to show you how to find it, transform it, and use it in the wild. What can you do with some old bones? Keep watching, and you'll see why this bone is an essential piece of the Wilderness Strong toolkit. Welcome to Wilderness Strong. We are all about nature, bushcraft, ethnobotany, and wilderness survival. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what we've got coming up for you. Now, with all that said, let's talk about bones. So having a good splitting tool is an absolute must for any primitive toolkit. Native Americans usually made their splitting tools from bone, and they were especially fond of one very specific bone that we're going to use today. They used it for splitting reeds, tree bark, and fibrous plants like stinging nettle and dogbane. We were first splitting this leg bone when we were making Paiute harpoon tips. But the bone turned out to be from a younger deer and it wasn't quite thick enough. But it was perfect for making a bone splitting tool. When working with bones, we take the time to groove them with a graving stone just where we want them to break. But on some bones like this one, instead of first grooving them, we just find a weak spot and carefully tap it until we break through. Then we use a sharp chopping tool and work it in the direction that we want it to go until it splits. When working with bone, you need a number of different grades of grinding stones. The more coarse to work down the bone to basic shape, and the finer ones for sharpening. This particular stone came from southern Utah. We picked it up while we were there studying the lives of the cliff dwellers called the Anasazis. We have enjoyed decades of studying their lives and the tools of these Native Americans, and we hope in the future we can take you to some of the remote special places that we have found in a future video. Bone tools need to feel good in your hand, so the back end needs to be ground down just a bit. Smaller grinding stones can be helpful for getting into the harder places of the bone and to smooth it out, or just to make it look white and nice. This is a very fine grade sandstone, and it can put a very sharp edge on a bone. This is some pine pitch that's been heated, and when it cools, it becomes hard. We're going to fill in the gap in this bone to make it easier to grip and make it more comfortable in our hand. We got an ember from a friction fire and heated up the pitch to make it soft and pliable. The melted pitch only stays soft for a short time. It'll stay soft and pliable for about a minute with a larger amount of pitch, but a shorter time with a smaller amount. It gets hard in about 10 seconds if the layer of pitch is super thin. Okay, here we're using a bone and then a stone tool to scrape the edges where the pitch meets the bone. This splitting tool is going to be so nice to use, very natural and comfortable in the hand. Okay, here we're using it to get some nettle fiber, which we'll use to make a cord loop to fit through the top of the bone. Rubbing a little bit of dust into the pitch is usually unnecessary after it's been melted and hardened, but sometimes we rub in just a little bit of dust to make sure it doesn't have any stickiness to it if it starts to warm up in our hands. Okay, here the knife is complete, but we're also going to add a cord to the top for slipping our hand through, which will make it more convenient to work with. We'll show that footage in just a sec. But first, check out our favorite deer bone for tool making. This is a leg bone of a deer, and actually it's 3 bones hooked together. The top bone is the ulna bone, and it was prized by Native Americans for making splitting knives and awls. It's only found in the front legs of a deer and not the back. The ulna bone comes with a natural grip for the hand, and then it tapers thin to the other end and can easily be turned into a knife. They used it to work plant fibers off of their stalks and for splitting all kinds of bark, including cedar bark, which had several layers, and many tribes wove it together to make mats and clothing. Sometimes the ulna bone was made into a sharp knife for splitting small fish like herring. These are some stone flakes that have sharp edges. Sometimes we do a little flint knapping on the edge to sharpen them up when they get dull. But to begin with, when they're first broken off of a larger stone, they're plenty sharp. When we have a lot of rough work to do on very hard surfaces, we don't need to make very elaborate finished tools, because they'll only get dull and then they'll soon wear out. Instead, we just use raw broken stones or flakes to do the job. Here we're working to separate the ulna deer bone from the others. We got to be careful here and not force the bone loose, because we got to make sure the thin tip of the bone doesn't break off. This is a basalt saw, and we're using the end of it as a chopper to help work down the tendons and the gristle so we can work the bone loose. You can see here how the ulna bone is connected to the leg bone. Here we decided to put a small bone tool under the ulna bone, so it can put a little upward pressure on it, but not too much so that it breaks. Finally, it's coming off, but we still got to be very careful with the other end so it doesn't break. So it looks like this ulna bone is just a little bit longer than our other tool, but we think it's going to work perfect. We need to scrape it down and make it smooth. This is a flint scraper. Sometimes we use sandstone in the process. We need to smooth it all out so we can decide how long the knife should be. We don't want it to be too flimsy at the end, or it might bend and break when we use it. Okay, here's the very end of the ulna bone. This is a piece of sandstone that can be worked into the more difficult places to clean and smooth. Now, after testing the strength of the bone, we've decided on a good length that'll be plenty long enough and not too flimsy at the end. The ulna bone at this thin end is a solid bone and doesn't have a pithy inner part. We're just using two different saws here to cut it. Doing a quick test on a stinging nettle stalk to see if the end is ground thin enough. Now we got to drill a hole in the end. We're going to work this stone into a drill for making the hole. We use some deer antler tips and a piece of leather for it. We like to put a cord in the end of some of our tools which can fit around our hand or wrist. Then if we want to let go for a moment and use both hands for something, it's right there to take up again. Also, it's nice to be able to hang your tools up if you want. This stone drill is big and bulky at the back end, which may still work okay, but we're going to make it a little bit smaller. To begin the hole, we need to use what we call a graver stone, just to get a minor impression going for the drill point to be set into. The drill was working all right to begin with, but as it was spinning, it just was a little bit off center, so we decided to make it a bit shorter and smaller so it could be inserted straighter into the shaft. Okay, now that feels way better. The drill shaft is spinning smooth. When we want a straight hole and not so wide at either end, sometimes we use a bone drill bit to cut through the softer, pithy area of the bone. Bone drill bits can also be used to work through harder bone by using a little grit in the hole to begin with, and then putting a lot of downward pressure and building up enough heat to burn through the bone. Okay, here we got the hole worked through. Now we need to make a nettle cord to go through it. This is the finished product, which fits the fingers and it feels very nice. It is clear why the Native Americans liked this particular bone for making splitting knives. It's nice to have two or more of a tool so that there's less concern about losing one when you're out in the wilderness, because you know you still have one at home. Okay, let's get a hole drilled so we can add that lanyard for our first splitting knife. It's amazing to me what can be done with some old bones. The reason it's amazing is because not only can they become a tool that can work for a job, but rather they turn into the ideal tool for the job, which is the case when it comes to harvesting and processing bark. The ulna bone has a built-in comfortable handle and a natural curve that looks like it was specifically designed for this task. Each of these knives are thin, sharp, and durable, exactly what we need when we're out in the field or a workshop working on a project. If you like what we're doing here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave us a quick comment, and hit the big thumbs up. All of that lets YouTube know that you're enjoying our content and helps support the work that we're doing. Thanks for watching.